Arab millionaire discovers. Black nanny protecting his disabled child. What he did. Next shocked all. In the golden city of Dubai, where skyscrapers touched the clouds and luxury defined every corner, lived Khalid, an Arab millionaire whose wealth commanded respect across the region. Yet, beneath the gold and grandeur, Khalid carried a quiet sorrow, for his only son Amir had been bound to a wheelchair after a tragic accident. Despite every effort to find the best care, Amir grew more withdrawn with each passing day, as nannies came and went, treating him either with cold detachment or suffocating pity. Then came Grace, a black woman from Africa with no jewels or titles, only a heart full of strength and compassion. From the moment she stepped into the mansion, her presence was different. She didn't see Amir as broken or weak. She saw a boy still capable of laughter, dreams, and courage. Grace played with him, encouraged him to move his hands and legs in tiny exercises, and read him stories filled with heroes who looked beyond their struggles. Slowly, the light returned to Amir's eyes, and for the first time in years, Khalid saw his son smile. Yet, while Grace and Amir's bond grew stronger, the world outside whispered with disdain. At lavish gatherings, relatives questioned why a wealthy man would trust his precious child to a black nanny, while guests scoffed and accused her of overstepping boundaries. Even within the household, jealousy brewed as staff muttered behind her back. But Grace stood firm, unbothered by judgment, her focus only on Amir's happiness. When local boys mocked Amir's disability, Grace stepped forward like a shield, her voice sharp with authority, defending him as though he were her own. Khalid, who often watched silently, began to notice that his son's laughter was loudest when Grace was near. Then came the day that tested everything. While Khalid was away at an important business meeting, chaos erupted in the villa as a fire broke out in the kitchen, spreading rapidly through the house. Staff scrambled to protect valuables and personal belongings, but Grace thought only of Amir. Without hesitation, she lifted him from his wheelchair, ignoring the thick smoke that stung her eyes and the flames that licked at her arms. Step by step, coughing and stumbling, she carried him to safety until firefighters arrived. When Khalid returned and learned that Grace had risked her life for Amir, he was deeply shaken. The woman society had dismissed and ridiculed had shown more love, courage, and loyalty than all those who flaunted wealth and status. In front of his entire circle, Khalid declared that Grace was no longer just a nanny, but a part of their family. He honored her by creating a foundation in her name to support disabled children across the Middle East, crediting her for teaching him the true meaning of love and sacrifice. The same voices that once whispered against her now applauded, but Grace never sought applause. Her only joy was in Amir's smile. In the end, the story of an Arab millionaire and a black nanny proved one timeless truth. Family is not always made of blood, but of love, courage, and selfless devotion. In the polished halls of Khalid's luxurious estate, where every chandelier sparkled and every guest was dressed in silk, Grace's presence often stood out, not for her flaws but for the judgment others cast upon her. Khalid's relatives whispered behind jeweled hands, their voices dripping with mockery as they asked why a millionaire would entrust his only son to a black nanny. At social gatherings, acquaintances snickered, questioning whether Grace's compassion was genuine or just a clever act to secure her place in the household. Even the staff, whose own duty was to serve with loyalty, often watched her with envy, assuming she was trying to climb above her station. But Grace, rooted in dignity and strength, never flinched at the harsh stares or bitter words. She had come to care for Amir, not to impress society, and in Amir's fragile world, she became his shield and his source of light. At night, when shadows frightened him and tears wet his pillow, it was Grace who sat beside him, whispering comfort and holding his hand until he drifted back to sleep. In the daylight, when local boys tried to tease him for being in a wheelchair, It was Grace who stepped between them with fierce eyes and a voice that silenced cruelty. She was more than a caretaker. She was a guardian who refused to let the world's scorn define Amir's worth. And though Khalid rarely spoke of it, he noticed. From his quiet vantage points, he observed how his son's face brightened in Grace's presence, how Amir laughed freely when she played with him, and how his fragile confidence grew stronger under her protection. These were things money had never been able to buy, and they stirred something in Khalid's heart that he hadn't felt in years. While society doubted her intentions and staff mocked her resolve, Grace remained unshaken, holding her head high, and focusing only on the boy who needed her most. The more the world tried to push her down, the more fiercely she stood her ground, proving through every small act of kindness and courage that love and loyalty carried a power far greater than status or wealth. In the quiet moments when Khalid saw Amir's eyes sparkle with joy, he began to understand that what others called weakness in Grace was, in truth, the greatest strength of all. The afternoon was calm, with the golden sun streaming through the tall glass windows of Khalid's villa, when life suddenly turned into chaos. In the grand kitchen, a small electrical spark from one of the appliances caught fire, and within minutes, flames began to spread across the polished counters and expensive wooden cabinets. The smell of smoke crept into the corridors, and panic erupted among the staff. Some shouted in fear, others rushed to gather jewelry, documents, and valuables, while a few simply fled, their footsteps echoing through the marble halls. But in the midst of that growing inferno, one thought consumed Grace: Amir. She knew the boy was in his room, completely vulnerable in his wheelchair, and every second wasted was a risk to his fragile life. Without thinking of her own safety, Grace ran against the stream of terrified servants, covering her mouth with a cloth as the smoke thickened. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her determination was unshakable. When she reached Amir's room, she found him trembling, wide-eyed, with fear, unable to move. His hands clutched the arms of his chair, his small voice calling her name. In that instant, Grace's protective instincts took over. She bent down, lifted him carefully into her arms, and held him close against her chest, whispering, "I've got you, don't be afraid." The fire roared louder, the ceiling crackled above, and the smoke stung her eyes until tears streamed down her face, but she pressed forward, one step at a time through the burning corridor. The heat seared her skin, and her arms, though burning with pain, did not loosen their grip on Amir. Outside, neighbors had already gathered, watching the villa consumed by flames, while firefighters fought to break through the gates. Gasps filled the crowd when they saw the silhouette of a woman emerging from the smoke. Grace stumbling, coughing, her clothes singed, but refusing to fall until Amir was safe. When she finally stepped out into the open air, the boy still secure in her embrace, the crowd erupted in shock and awe. Paramedics rushed forward, treating Amir for mild smoke inhalation and carefully tending to Grace's burns. Yet she kept asking only one thing, over and over. "Is he okay?" News spread quickly across Dubai, carried by phones, cameras, and whispers. A nanny, one dismissed by many as insignificant, had braved the flames to save the child of one of the richest men in the city. To many who once mocked her, it was a moment of silence and shame. To Amir, it was the proof of a love stronger than fear. And though Grace's arms were marked with burns, they became symbols of her sacrifice, forever remembered as the day a woman's society had judged as ordinary, revealed extraordinary courage for a boy who was not bound to her by blood, but by something far deeper. When Khalid returned to his villa and was told every detail of what had happened, his heart trembled in a way it never had before. The image of Grace carrying Amir through fire haunted his thoughts, and the sight of her bandaged arms, scorched by flames, left him speechless. Here was a woman whom society dismissed as merely a servant, someone judged for her skin and her status, yet she had proven more loyal, more courageous, and more selfless than all the so-called friends who surrounded him in his circles of wealth. For years, Khalid had believed money could solve every problem, but in that moment, he realized that no amount of riches could buy the love and bravery Grace had given his son. When Amir, still shaken but safe, reached for her hand and whispered, "Don't leave me," Khalid felt tears burn his eyes. He knew then that Grace was no longer just an employee. She was family. Days later, when the story reached the press, and reporters gathered outside his estate, Khalid made a decision that stunned the city. Standing tall before the cameras, with Grace and Amir beside him, he declared that Grace was no longer to be called a nanny, but recognized as Amir's guardian and protector, honored in every way possible. He publicly thanked her for saving his son, not only from the fire but from the loneliness and despair that had consumed him long before. Then, in a move that shook the foundations of his high society, Khalid announced the creation of a charitable foundation in Grace's name, dedicated to supporting disabled children and their caretakers across the Middle East, ensuring that no child would ever be left unseen or unloved. Those who once whispered behind closed doors now fell silent, ashamed of their prejudice, and many who mocked her now applauded with respect. But Grace, humble as ever, did not seek applause or recognition. She only smiled softly and held Amir's hand, content in knowing that he was safe and happy. To her, the foundation, the honors, and the media's attention were secondary. The only true reward was Amir's laughter and the bond they shared. In the quiet that followed the noise of cameras and reporters, Khalid looked at Grace with gratitude deeper than words. He realized that she had taught him a lesson no wealth or power could buy, that true family is not bound by blood or privilege but by love, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. From that day on, Grace was no longer the outsider in the mansion. She was the heart of it. And the world would forever remember the story of the black nanny who protected a disabled child and the Arab millionaire who discovered that his greatest treasure was not his riches, but the love that had been there all along,